I'm Melanie, 34, and the sight before me shattered my heart into a million pieces. My daughter Sophie, only 8 years old, was on her hands and knees scrubbing our kitchen floor. Alone in an empty house. Tears streaked her cheeks as she explained that Grandma said she needed to finish before they got back from the amusement park with Lily, their real granddaughter. Something inside me hardened into steel. Before I continue this story, please like and subscribe and let me know where you're watching from today. The path that led to that heartbreaking moment began 5 years earlier at a charity gala for children's education. That's where I first met Daniel. Tall and charming with kind eyes that crinkled when he laughed. I was there representing my marketing firm, which had donated significantly to the cause. He approached me at the silent auction, outbidding me on a weekend getaway package with a playful wink. "How about we share it?" he suggested. Something about his confidence disarmed me completely. Our romance progressed at lightning speed. Within 6 months, we were practically living together, and by our first anniversary, he proposed during a sunset hike in Sedona. I said yes without hesitation. At 29, I had a successful career as a marketing executive, and Daniel, at 31, was thriving as a software developer. Our life seemed perfect on paper. When we started trying for a baby, we assumed it would happen quickly. It didn't. After a year of disappointment, we consulted fertility specialists who discovered issues that would make conception difficult. 3 rounds of IVF followed, each more emotionally and physically draining than the last. The final failed attempt left me hollow, but it also opened our hearts to another possibility. What about adoption? Daniel suggested one night as we sat on our porch swing, a glass of wine in hand. There are so many children who need homes. The adoption process was rigorous and lengthy. But the moment I saw Sophie's photo in the agency's files, I felt an instant connection. She was 4 years old with unruly auburn curls and a shy smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her file detailed her history in the foster system since age 2, bounced between 3 homes due to her biological mother's struggles with addiction. When we met her for the first time, she clutched a worn teddy bear and wouldn't make eye contact. But by our 3rd visit, she was showing me her favorite book and asking if I could read it to her. 6 months later, we finalized the adoption, and Sophie became our daughter. The early days were challenging but beautiful. Sophie had nightmares and attachment issues, natural responses to her early experiences of abandonment. She would follow me from room to room, panicking if she couldn't see me. Daniel was patient and loving, spending evenings building elaborate blanket forts and telling stories until she felt secure enough to sleep. The first hint of trouble came when we visited Daniel's parents, Howard and Barbara, at their suburban home for Sunday dinner. They were polite but distant with Sophie, addressing questions to Daniel and me rather than speaking directly to her. Barbara had prepared Sophie's plate with tiny portions, as though uncertain what a child would eat, despite having raised 3 children of her own. "She's quite small for her age, isn't she?" Barbara remarked, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I suppose that's to be expected, given her background." Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, a silent plea for patience. Later, when Sophie was using the bathroom, Barbara lowered her voice. "You're very brave, taking on someone else's problem. I'm not sure I could do it." Daniel defended our choice, but his protest felt half-hearted. "Mom, she's not a problem. She's our daughter." "Of course, dear." Barbara patted his hand. "That's what the papers say." 3 months after we adopted Sophie, Daniel's brother James and his wife Catherine announced they were expecting. The family's response was overwhelming. Barbara immediately began knitting baby blankets and buying tiny outfits. Howard started constructing an elaborate wooden rocking horse in his workshop. Their excitement was palpable and in stark contrast to their muted response to Sophie's arrival. When Lily was born, she became the center of the family universe. At gatherings, Barbara would hold court with Lily on her lap, while Sophie sat quietly in the corner, trying to make herself invisible. Family photos on the mantel showcased Lily's milestones prominently, while the single photo of Sophie was tucked behind others, as though an afterthought. Daniel initially defended Sophie, insisting his parents treat both girls equally. But as time passed, his protests became less frequent, his silence a tacit acceptance of the disparity. I watched as he was gradually pulled back into his family's orbit, his desire for their approval overriding his commitment to our daughter. Barbara's comments became increasingly direct. "It's just different when it's your real flesh and blood," she'd say while cuddling Lily. You can see James's eyes and Catherine's smile. That biological connection is simply irreplaceable. Howard was less subtle. He'd ask uncomfortable questions about Sophie's biological parents within her earshot. "Does addiction run in families? Should you be watching for signs?" He'd whisper loudly as though Sophie couldn't hear or understand. Family gatherings became exercises in barely disguised exclusion. "Lily, come help Grandma bake cookies," Barbara would announce, while Sophie watched from the sidelines. When Sophie would ask to help too, Barbara would find a reason why she couldn't. "Oh, these are special family recipes, dear, for generations of Andersons." As my career advanced, occasional travel became necessary. These 3-day trips filled me with anxiety, not because I worried about Sophie's physical care, but because I feared what subtle emotional damage might occur in my absence. Daniel had become increasingly aligned with his parents' perspective, referring to Lily as family in a way that implicitly excluded Sophie. Before this most recent trip to Chicago, my intuition screamed that something wasn't right. Daniel had been spending more time with his parents, often taking Lily along for cousin bonding, but leaving Sophie with a babysitter. When I questioned this, he dismissed my concerns. "You're being oversensitive," he said. "Sophie doesn't even like going to their house. She's happier here." Of course, she was happier at home. At home, no one made her feel like an unwanted guest. For this trip, Daniel assured me he would work from home and take care of Sophie himself. "Don't worry so much," he said, kissing my forehead as I prepared to leave. "We'll be fine. I promise." I believed him. That was my mistake. The Chicago project wrapped up 2 days ahead of schedule, largely due to my team's extraordinary effort and late nights. By Thursday morning, instead of Saturday as planned, we had delivered the full marketing strategy to the client, who was delighted with our work. My boss pulled me aside after the final presentation. "Go home early, Melanie," she said. "You've earned it. Surprise that family of yours." I booked the first available flight, daydreaming about Sophie's reaction. She always tackled me with bear hugs when I returned from trips, peppering me with questions about where I'd been and what I'd seen. I decided not to tell Daniel, imagining his pleased surprise when I walked through the door 2 days early. The flight was smooth, and I felt lighter with each mile that brought me closer to home. I stopped to pick up Sophie's favorite strawberry ice cream and a new puzzle we could work on together over the now extended weekend. The drive from the airport to our suburban house took 40 minutes, during which I hummed along to the radio, anticipating the reunion ahead. Our 2-story colonial looked peaceful in the afternoon light. Daniel's car wasn't in the driveway, which struck me as odd since he'd said he was working from home. Perhaps he'd gone for groceries or to pick up Sophie from a play date, though he hadn't mentioned any plans when we spoke briefly that morning. I unlocked the front door, calling out, "Hello? Anyone home?" "I'm back early." Silence greeted me. The living room was tidy but showed signs of recent use. A half-empty coffee mug on the side table, Sophie's math workbook open on the coffee table. In the kitchen, breakfast dishes were stacked in the sink, a box of cereal left open on the counter. Daniel was usually meticulous about cleaning up, which added to my growing unease. "Sophie? Daniel?" I called again, dropping my suitcase by the stairs. That's when I heard it, a faint sniffling sound coming from the far side of the kitchen. I rounded the corner and froze. Sophie was on her hands and knees, a bucket of soapy water beside her, scrubbing the tile floor with a brush. Her small shoulders shook with suppressed sobs. She wore the same outfit she'd had on when I'd video called yesterday morning. Her auburn curls were tangled, and her face was streaked with dried tears and smudges of dirt. "Sophie?" I whispered, my voice catching. She jerked upright, eyes wide with fear. "Mommy, you're not supposed to be home yet." Her voice held panic rather than joy. I dropped to my knees beside her, not caring that my work clothes were getting soaked on the wet floor. Honey, what's going on? Where's Daddy? Why are you cleaning the floor by yourself? Sophie's lower lip trembled. I'm not supposed to tell. Grandma said I had to finish my punishment before they got back. Punishment? Back from where? Who's with Daddy? The questions tumbled out as I took the brush from her raw, reddened hands. Sophie looked down, her voice barely audible. Daddy went with Grandma and Grandpa to Six Flags. They took Lily because she's their real granddaughter. I had to stay home because I broke a glass yesterday and made a mess. My blood ran cold. You've been home alone? Since when? Since breakfast. She glanced at the Mickey Mouse watch we'd given her for Christmas. It was now past 3 in the afternoon. Grandma said real family members get to go on fun trips. I have to earn my place by being extra good and doing all my chores perfectly. I struggled to maintain composure as I gently guided Sophie to the kitchen table, helping her wash her hands and fixing her a sandwich. She devoured it, confirming my suspicion that she hadn't eaten since morning. While she ate, I pieced together what had happened. Daniel had told me he needed to work, but instead, he'd joined his parents on a trip to Six Flags with Lily. They had deliberately excluded Sophie, leaving an 8-year-old child alone for over 8 hours with a list of chores to complete as punishment for a minor accident. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet, was a handwritten list in Barbara's elegant script. 1. Dust living room. 2. Vacuum all carpets. 3. Clean bathroom sink and mirror. 4. Scrub kitchen floor. 5. Fold laundry. At the bottom, a final note. If these aren't done properly by the time we return, there will be additional consequences. Real family members know how to be responsible. The systematic cruelty of it stole my breath. I sat beside Sophie, stroking her hair as she finished eating. Has this happened before, sweetheart? When I've been away on trips? She nodded slowly, fear clouding her eyes. Sometimes. Usually MS. Patel from next door checks on me once or twice, but she's visiting her sister this week. Our elderly neighbor, who had no idea she was being used as cover for child abandonment. What other things happen when I'm away? I kept my voice gentle, fighting to control my rage. Sophie's revelations spilled out hesitantly. How Barbara would make Sophie eat at a separate table during family dinners. How Howard never remembered her birthday, but made elaborate celebrations for Lily. How she was excluded from family photos and outings. How Daniel initially protested, but eventually went along with his parents' treatment. Daddy says I need to try harder to fit in, Sophie whispered, examining her raw hands. Grandma says I should be grateful they even let me come to their house, since I'm not really an Anderson. The final blow came when Sophie looked up at me, her eyes swimming with tears. Do you wish you had a real daughter too, Mommy? Like Lily? In that moment, something crystallized within me. The rage, the heartbreak, the betrayal, all hardened into absolute resolve. I pulled Sophie into my arms. Listen to me very carefully, I said, holding her tear-stained face between my hands. You are my real daughter. You have been since the moment I first saw you. Nothing will ever change that. Not papers, not blood, not anyone's opinion. You are the most precious person in my life. She buried her face against my shoulder, her small body shaking with sobs of relief. As I held her, I already knew what needed to happen next. After making Sophie a proper meal and settling her in front of a cartoon with promises that she wasn't in trouble, I began a quiet investigation. My hands trembled with controlled fury as I moved through our home, uncovering layer after layer of betrayal. In Sophie's room, while looking for clean pajamas, I noticed the corner of a notebook peeking out from beneath her mattress. Hesitantly, I pulled it out, recognizing the butterfly-covered journal I'd given her for her 8th birthday, encouraging her to write down her thoughts and feelings. The entries, written in a child's uneven script, documented a pattern of emotional abuse far worse than I'd imagined. Grandma said I have bad blood. What does that mean? Daddy didn't say anything when Grandpa called me the adoption at dinner. Like I'm not a person. Lily got a new bike. Grandma said I have to prove I deserve nice things first. Grandma threw away the picture I made her. She put lilies on the fridge. My stomach churned as I turned page after page, each entry revealing Sophie's growing belief that she was somehow defective, unworthy of love. The most recent entry, from just 2 days ago, simply read, "I wish I could be a real person like Lily." The family iPad was next. Daniel and I shared an Apple ID for family devices, which meant his messages synced across our devices. I found a conversation thread from earlier that week between Daniel and his parents. Barbara, Six Flags this Thursday? Perfect weather forecast. Daniel, sounds great, but what about Sophie? Melanie's in Chicago until Saturday. Barbara, does that child really need to come? She spoiled our last outing with her whining. Howard, we're taking our real granddaughter for a special day. That's not a crime. Daniel, Mom, don't say it like that. Sophie is sensitive about adoption stuff. Barbara, oh please, you're as bad as Melanie with this obsession about making her feel included. The girl needs to learn her place. Family is blood. Howard, exactly. Lily is our flesh and blood. It's different. Daniel's response made my blood run cold. Fine. I'll figure something out for Sophie. Barbara, she can stay home. She's old enough to be alone for a few hours. Give her some chores to keep her busy. Builds character. Daniel. Melanie would kill me if she found out I left Sophie alone all day. Barbara, Melanie won't find out unless you tell her. Since when do you let your wife dictate your relationship with your own parents? After several minutes, okay. But we need to be back by dinner, so I can say we were just out for a few hours. The conversation continued with plans for the day, casual and excited, as though the decision to abandon an 8-year-old child was completely normal. Daniel's occasional weak protests were quickly overridden by his mother's manipulation and his own desire to please his parents. My hands shaking, I moved to social media, where Barbara had already posted photos from their Six Flags adventure. There was Daniel, smiling broadly with his arm around Lily on a carousel. Howard buying cotton candy. Barbara and Lily posing with a costumed character. The caption read, "Family fun day with our precious granddaughter." The comments were filled with friends cooing over what wonderful grandparents they were. No mention of Sophie. No acknowledgement that another grandchild existed. In every photo, Daniel looked completely at ease, showing no signs of concern for the daughter he'd left alone at home. My search expanded. In Daniel's desk drawer, I found notes from Sophie's teacher expressing concern about her withdrawn behavior and declining academic performance. Sophie seems sad and distracted lately. She mentioned feeling like she doesn't belong in her family. Could we schedule a conference to discuss this? The note was dated 2 months ago. Daniel had never mentioned it to me. In the laundry room, tucked behind the detergent, I discovered a hand-drawn chart Sophie had created titled, "Ways to be Good Enough." It included items like, "Don't talk too much," "Clean up perfectly," and "Don't ask for things." Each item had check marks or sad faces beside it, as though she was grading herself on earning the right to be loved. My phone pinged with a text from Daniel, "Having a great day with my parents and Lily. Everything okay at home?" He still thought I was in Chicago, unaware that his carefully constructed deception had collapsed. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat on our bed, surrounded by evidence of systematic emotional abuse against my daughter, and tried to process the depth of betrayal. Not just from Barbara and Howard, whose cruelty was almost expected at this point, but from Daniel, my husband, Sophie's father. The man who had stood beside me when we finalized her adoption, promising to love and protect her always. He had not only failed to protect her, he had actively participated in her mistreatment. He had chosen his parents' approval over his daughter's well-being. He had left our 8-year-old child alone for an entire day as punishment for a minor accident, while he enjoyed roller coasters and funnel cakes. The sound of the garage door opening jerked me from my thoughts. Sophie's cartoon must have ended because she appeared in the bedroom doorway, anxiety evident in her posture. "They're home," she whispered, her small fingers twisting the hem of her shirt. "Should I go finish the floor?" I gathered her into my arms. "No, sweetheart. You don't need to finish anything. You've done nothing wrong. Nothing at all." Setting her on the bed, I kissed her forehead. Stay here and rest. I need to talk to Daddy and Grandma and Grandpa. Are you mad? She asked, her voice small. Not at you, I assured her. Never at you. I closed the bedroom door behind me and descended the stairs, each step cementing my resolve. In the kitchen, I could hear them entering through the garage, their voices light and cheerful, laden with shopping bags and the remnants of a joyful day. It was time to face the family that had betrayed us both. The kitchen filled with their voices before I saw them. Lily's excited chatter about roller coasters, Howard's deep laugh, Barbara's instructions about where to put the shopping bags, and Daniel's relaxed responses. They sounded like the perfect family returning from a perfect day. I stood silently by the refrigerator, Barbara's cruel chore list still pinned with a magnet beside me. Daniel entered first, arms full of Six Flags merchandise and leftover snacks. He froze when he saw me, color draining from his face. Melanie, what are you? I thought you were in Chicago until Saturday. His voice cracked as his eyes darted to the hallway, perhaps checking if Sophie was within earshot. Barbara and Howard followed, with 7-year-old Lily bouncing between them. Barbara's perfectly composed expression slipped for just a moment before she recovered, her voice syrupy sweet. Oh, you're home early. What a lovely surprise. She set her designer purse on the counter as though nothing was amiss. Howard barely acknowledged me, grunting something that might have been a greeting while examining the kitchen floor. The girl didn't even finish her one job properly. Look at those streaks. Her name is Sophie, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage boiling inside me. And she's 8 years old. Daniel stepped forward, already forming excuses. No, we just took Lily out for a few hours. Sophie was fine. I checked in by phone. Really? I raised an eyebrow. Because Sophie says no one called. And according to the timestamps on Barbara's social media posts, you've been gone since at least 10 this morning. It's now almost 4. Barbara waved a dismissive hand. Children exaggerate. And she needed to learn some responsibility after breaking that crystal vase yesterday. It was a water glass, I corrected. A regular water glass that she accidentally knocked over while clearing the table. And for that, you left her alone for 6 hours with no food and a list of adult chores. Daniel's face flushed. Mom said Ms. Patel would check in on her. Ms. Patel is in Cleveland visiting her sister. Did any of you actually verify that someone would watch our 8-year-old daughter? Or did you just decide that abandoning a child was an appropriate punishment? Lily looked between us, confusion on her small face. Why couldn't Sophie come with us? I asked if she could. Barbara patted Lily's head. Because she's not really part of the family, dear. You're our real granddaughter. The casual cruelty with which she said it, right in front of me, confirmed everything. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a one-time lapse in judgment. This was their true belief system, one they were actively teaching to the next generation. Daniel winced, but said nothing. His silence was deafening. Howard stepped forward, his imposing frame meant to intimidate. Now listen here. The girl was perfectly safe. She's old enough to be home alone for a few hours. In my day, kids were much more independent. Her name is Sophie, I repeated, my voice ice cold. She is 8 years old. And leaving her alone all day is not just cruel, it's illegal. It's called child abandonment. Barbara rolled her eyes. Always so dramatic, Melanie. This is why Daniel had reservations about the adoption from the beginning. He knew you'd be obsessed with the girl to an unhealthy degree. I turned to Daniel, whose face confirmed Barbara's statement. Is that true? You had reservations. He shrugged uncomfortably. I just wasn't sure we were ready. My parents thought we should try more fertility treatments instead. A piece clicked into place. Daniel had never fully committed to Sophie. He'd gone along with the adoption to please me, perhaps hoping we'd eventually have real children too. In his mind, and certainly in his parents' minds, Sophie had always been temporary. Conditional, less than. Sophie understands her place in the family, Daniel attempted weakly. She knows we care about her. Does she? I pulled out my phone and showed him the photo I'd taken of her hands, raw and reddened from harsh cleaning chemicals. Because she spent the day believing she deserved to be excluded and punished. She asked me if I wished I had a real daughter too. Howard scoffed. Blood is thicker than water. That's just a fact of life she'll need to accept. Lily tugged at Barbara's sleeve. I got Sophie a stuffed panda from the gift shop. Can I give it to her? No need to waste your money on her, Barbara replied, taking the toy and placing it with Lily's other purchases. Save it for someone who deserves it. That was the moment something broke permanently inside me. The last thread of hope that this family could ever truly accept Sophie. That Daniel could stand up to his parents, that we could somehow make this work, snapped completely. Sophie and I are leaving, I stated calmly. Daniel's head jerked up. Don't be ridiculous. You're overreacting, as usual. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal? I repeated incredulously. You abandoned our daughter alone for an entire day as punishment for a minor accident. You've allowed your parents to systematically emotionally abuse her. You've stood by while they've taught her she's less valuable, less worthy of love because she's adopted. Barbara huffed indignantly. She should be grateful we acknowledge her at all. Many families wouldn't. Daniel reached for my arm. Melanie, come on. Let's discuss this privately. You're being hysterical. I stepped back from his touch. I've seen the text messages, Daniel. I know this wasn't the first time. I've read Sophie's journal. I've seen the evidence of what's been happening when I'm not around. His face paled. You went through my private messages? That's your concern? Not the fact that your daughter is being emotionally destroyed by the people who should love her most. Howard stepped forward, his voice lowered to what he probably thought was a reasonable tone. Now, Melanie, every family has its dynamics. Sophie needs to understand that biological connections are different. It's just nature. No, I said firmly. What Sophie needs to understand is that real family protects each other. Real family doesn't abandon or belittle a child. Real family is about love, not blood. Daniel's expression shifted from defensive to panicked as he realized I was serious. You can't just leave. Where would you even go? That's no longer your concern, I replied, already moving toward the stairs. You've made your choice very clear today. Now I'm making mine. As I turned to go upstairs, Daniel called after me, his voice cracking. Melanie, please. Let's talk about this rationally. I'm sure we can work something out. I paused on the stairs and looked back at the four of them, Howard stern and unmoved, Barbara smugly certain of her position, Lily confused and clutching her new toys, and Daniel finally showing fear as he realized the consequences of his actions. There's nothing to work out, I said quietly. You left our daughter alone all day, scrubbing floors while you went to an amusement park. You've shown me exactly who you are and what matters to you. Sophie deserves better. Barbara called after me, her voice sharp. She's just a dramatic child seeking attention. This is exactly why adoption is so problematic. You never know what kind of troubled behavior you're bringing into your home. I didn't dignify her with a response. Instead, I climbed the stairs to pack our essential belongings, leaving them standing in the kitchen surrounded by their Six Flags souvenirs and shattered illusions. In Sophie's room, I found her curled up on her bed, clutching the worn teddy bear she'd brought with her from her last foster home. Her eyes were wide and fearful as I entered. Are we in trouble? She whispered. No, sweetheart, I said, sitting beside her and stroking her tangled curls. But we are going to stay somewhere else for a while. Can you help me pack some of your favorite things? As we packed her backpack with essentials, I kept my movements calm and deliberate despite the storm raging inside me. Sophie carefully selected a few treasured books, her special blanket, and a framed photo of just the two of us at the beach last summer. What about my school things? She asked, ever the responsible child. We'll get those later, I promised. Right now, let's just take what you need for tonight. Downstairs, Daniel was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, his parents no longer in sight. His face was a mixture of anger and dawning fear. This is ridiculous, Melanie, he hissed, keeping his voice low. You can't just take her and leave. We need to talk about this like adults. Like the adult who abandoned his 8-year-old daughter to go to an amusement park? I replied, guiding Sophie toward the front door. Or the adult who's allowed his parents to emotionally abuse his child for years? That's an extreme characterization, he protested, following us to the door. My parents just have traditional views about family. They're trying their best. I turned to face him fully. Their best isn't good enough. And neither is yours. I've made copies of the chore list, the text messages, and Sophie's journal. I've documented her physical condition upon my return. If you try to stop us from leaving, my next call will be to Child Protective Services. The threat landed as intended. Daniel stepped back, his face pale. You wouldn't. To protect Sophie? I absolutely would. I opened the front door. I'll contact you through my attorney about arrangements for Sophie's belongings. Attorney? His voice cracked. Melanie, please. This is our family. I looked at him sadly. Yes, it was. And you destroyed it. The drive to the residence inn was silent, Sophie staring out the window as suburban houses flashed by. I checked us in for a week, using my personal credit card rather than the joint account I shared with Daniel. The room was clean and anonymous, with 2 queen beds and a small kitchenette. Once Sophie was settled with a bath and room service, I made the first of many calls. Amanda, my college roommate turned family law attorney, answered on the second ring. I need your help, I said without preamble. It's an emergency custody situation. Amanda's voice turned immediately professional. Tell me everything. I detailed the events of the day, the evidence I'd gathered, and my immediate concerns. She listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification. Document everything, she advised. Take photos, save text messages. Write down exactly what happened today while it's fresh. I'll file for emergency temporary custody first thing tomorrow morning. Next, I emailed Sophie's school counselor, briefly explaining that we were dealing with a family crisis and requesting an emergency session for Sophie. Then I contacted my boss, who was horrified by my abbreviated explanation and immediately approved emergency family leave. My phone began buzzing with texts and calls from Daniel, which I ignored. Howard left a threatening voicemail about destroying the family, while Barbara's message was saccharine, suggesting I was overreacting to normal family dynamics. I saved both as evidence. The next morning, while Sophie slept, I drove to a nearby pharmacy to print the photos and screenshots I'd taken. The young clerk's expression grew increasingly concerned as multiple images of Sophie's raw hands and Barbara's chore list emerged from the printer. Are you and your daughter safe? She asked quietly, glancing around to ensure no one else could hear. The simple question nearly broke my composure. We're working on it, I managed. By 9 o'clock, I was in Amanda's office. A growing file of evidence spread between us. She examined each piece methodically, her expression hardening. This is clear emotional abuse and child endangerment, she confirmed. Leaving an 8-year-old alone all day is illegal in this state. The documented pattern of differential treatment and psychological harm strengthens our case substantially. She began drafting emergency custody papers immediately. We'll file these today. Given the evidence of abandonment, we should be able to get a hearing within 48 hours. While Amanda worked, I received an unexpected text from Catherine, James's wife and Lily's mother. Just heard what happened. Can we talk? Not all of us agree with Barbara and Howard. We met at a coffee shop near the hotel while Sophie attended her emergency counseling session. Catherine looked nervous, but determined as she slid into the booth across from me. I had no idea they left Sophie alone yesterday, she began, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. James and I thought she was with a sitter. We've been uncomfortable with how they treat her for a long time, but yesterday crossed a serious line. Catherine revealed that she'd witnessed numerous incidents of Barbara's preferential treatment, but had been reluctant to intervene in family dynamics. James confronted his mother this morning after Daniel told us you'd left. Barbara tried to justify it, saying Sophie needed discipline, but James wasn't having it. She pulled out her phone. I have texts from last month where Barbara specifically told me not to include Sophie in Lily's birthday planning because adopted children get too attached when included in family traditions. She forwarded the messages to me. Use these if they help Sophie. As we parted, Catherine squeezed my hand. Not everyone in the family thinks like Barbara and Howard. Some of us understand that family isn't about DNA. The support was unexpected but welcome. Back at the hotel, I found 3 more missed calls from Daniel and a text message, "Please come home. We can work this out. I'll talk to my parents." Too little, too late. By afternoon, Amanda had filed for emergency temporary custody. The judge was concerned about the abandonment, she reported. "We have a hearing tomorrow at 2. Daniel will be served with papers this evening." Sure enough, by 6 o'clock, my phone exploded with messages. Daniel was alternately pleading and angry. "How could you do this?" followed by, "Please, let's talk about this rationally." His parents' messages were less restrained, with Howard threatening legal action for defamation and Barbara suggesting I was mentally unstable. That evening, as Sophie slept fitfully in the hotel bed, my parents called from Arizona. They had been planning a visit in 2 weeks, but immediately offered to come sooner. "We'll be on the first flight tomorrow," my father assured me. "No one treats our granddaughter that way." Their unwavering support brought the first tears I'd allowed myself since discovering Sophie. This was what family should be: unconditional love and protection, not judgment and exclusion. The next day brought the temporary custody hearing. Daniel appeared with an expensive attorney, looking haggard and unprepared. When the judge reviewed the evidence, particularly the photos of Sophie alone cleaning and the documented text messages planning her abandonment, his expression grew increasingly stern. "Mr. Anderson," the judge addressed Daniel directly, "do you deny leaving your 8-year-old daughter home alone for approximately 6 hours while you attended an amusement park?" Daniel's attorney attempted to intervene, but the judge held up his hand. "I'd like to hear directly from Mr. Anderson." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "We thought she would be checked on. It was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding that resulted in child abandonment," the judge noted. "And these text messages suggesting this was planned and has happened before." By the end of the hearing, I was granted temporary sole custody, with Daniel allowed only supervised visitation pending a full custody evaluation. Barbara and Howard were barred from contact with Sophie until further notice. Outside the courthouse, Daniel caught up to me in the parking lot. His face was drawn, his eyes red-rimmed. "You've destroyed everything," he said, his voice breaking. "My parents are devastated. You've turned my own brother against me. All because of one mistake." I faced him squarely. "This wasn't one mistake, Daniel. This was the culmination of years of allowing Sophie to be treated as less than, of choosing your parents' approval over your daughter's well-being, of failing to be the father you promised to be." "I love Sophie," he insisted, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Love is protection," I replied. "Love is standing up for someone who can't stand up for themselves. Love is action, not words. And your actions have shown exactly where your priorities lie." As I turned to leave, he called after me, "What can I do to fix this?" I paused, looking back at the man I had once believed would be my partner in all things. That's not my concern anymore. My only priority is healing the damage that's been done to Sophie. Everything else is secondary. The drive back to the hotel was heavy with emotion, but also with a strange sense of clarity. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since discovering Sophie on the kitchen floor, I felt certain we were moving in the right direction. The weeks following our departure from the house unfolded in a blur of legal meetings, therapy appointments, and the practical challenges of rebuilding our lives. My parents arrived the day after the custody hearing, providing much-needed support and another layer of protection for Sophie. We found a small 2-bedroom apartment for short-term lease, close enough to Sophie's school that she could continue attending without disruption. My father drove to the house while Daniel was at work to collect more of our belongings. A tense encounter supervised by Amanda to ensure there were no issues. Daniel's initial shock gave way to a campaign to reclaim his family and reputation. He began showing up at Sophie's school, attempting to see her outside the supervised visitation schedule. The principal, now fully informed of the situation, turned him away and implemented additional security measures. Mr. Anderson seemed genuinely shocked when I refused to let him take Sophie for ice cream, the principal reported. He kept saying he was her father, as though that overrode the court order. Barbara and Howard took a different approach, hiring an expensive attorney of their own and attempting to paint me as mentally unstable and vindictive. They reached out to mutual friends, family members, and even Daniel's colleagues, spreading a narrative that I had overreacted to normal grandparenting and weaponized Sophie against her family. Their efforts backfired spectacularly when James and Catherine stepped forward with their own accounts of Barbara's preferential treatment. Daniel's sister Andrea, who had remained distant from family gatherings in recent years, also came forward. I stopped bringing my kids to Mom and Dad's house 3 years ago because of how they treated Sophie compared to their other grandchildren, she revealed during a deposition. It was subtle at first, but became increasingly obvious and cruel. When I confronted them, they insisted that adoption isn't the same as real family. Sophie's therapist, Dr. Brennan, confirmed signs of emotional abuse and neglect. Sophie exhibits classic symptoms of a child who has been made to feel conditional love is all she deserves, she testified. She believes she must earn basic affection through perfect behavior, and she expects abandonment as the consequence for minor mistakes. The story eventually leaked to social media after Howard made an ill-advised comment at his country club about that woman kidnapping our son's adopted child. A fellow member, whose own children were adopted, was appalled and shared the story on a local parents group. Public opinion swiftly turned against the Andersons. Howard's standing in the business community, which he had cultivated for decades, began to crumble as associates distanced themselves from the scandal. Barbara's charitable committee positions were quietly not renewed. Through it all, Sophie remained remarkably resilient yet fragile. She attended therapy twice weekly, slowly processing the belief system she'd internalized that she was somehow less deserving of love and belonging than her cousin. Grandma said, "I don't have Anderson blood, so I can't be a real Anderson," she told Dr. Brennan during a session I was allowed to observe. "But Mommy says family isn't about blood." "What do you think family is about?" Dr. Brennan asked gently. Sophie considered this seriously. "I think family is the people who don't leave you alone when bad things happen." Daniel's supervised visits were initially awkward and tense. Sophie was wary, watching him carefully as though expecting criticism or abandonment. He brought extravagant gifts, which Dr. Brennan advised me to moderate. "He's trying to buy her affection rather than doing the harder work of earning her trust," she explained. During the third visit, Daniel finally broke down when Sophie flinched as he reached to hug her. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked, his voice cracking. Sophie looked at her shoes. "Not afraid. Just waiting." "Waiting for what, sweetheart?" "For you to leave again. Or to say I'm not good enough." The pain on Daniel's face was genuine. "I've made terrible mistakes," he admitted. "I should have protected you better." It was the first honest moment between them since everything had happened, and while it didn't erase the damage done, it was at least a step toward something healthier. The full custody hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks after our initial departure. As the date approached, evidence continued to mount in our favor. Sophie's teacher provided documentation of behavioral changes that correlated with my business trips. Our elderly neighbor confirmed that she had never agreed to check on Sophie during the Six Flags trip, contradicting Daniel's claim. Perhaps most damning was Barbara's own testimony during deposition, where she stated unequivocally, "Of course we treat Lily differently. She's our actual granddaughter. The biological connection is what makes a real family." 2 days before the hearing, Daniel requested a meeting through our attorneys. We met at a neutral location, a conference room at Amanda's office building, with both lawyers present. Daniel looked thinner, with dark circles under his eyes and a haunted expression I'd never seen before. "I want to propose a settlement," he began. His offer was unexpected. He would agree to my having primary physical custody of Sophie, with him having regular visitation rights that would initially be supervised but could transition to unsupervised if Sophie's therapist approved. He would attend mandatory parenting classes and family therapy. Most surprisingly, he agreed to a restraining order keeping Barbara and Howard away from Sophie indefinitely. "Why no?" I asked, suspicious of the sudden capitulation. Daniel slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts of emails between him and his parents spanning the last several years. They documented a pattern of manipulation, subtle threats about his inheritance, and consistent undermining of Sophie's place in the family. "I've been a coward," he said simply. "I let them control me because it was easier than standing up to them. I failed Sophie, and I failed you. I don't deserve another chance. But Sophie deserves a father who will put her first from now on." The emails revealed the extent to which Barbara and Howard had orchestrated the division in our family, consistently putting Daniel in positions where he had to choose between pleasing his parents and supporting his daughter. It didn't excuse his choices, but it provided context for how deeply dysfunctional the family system had been. "What changed?" I asked. "Andrea showed me photos of Sophie's last birthday party," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "In every picture, she's checking my reaction before she shows any happiness, looking to see if she's allowed to enjoy her own celebration." What kind of father creates that fear in his child? We accepted the settlement offer with additional stipulations about therapy and parenting classes. The restraining order against Barbara and Howard was filed immediately. That evening, I had to explain the arrangement to Sophie. We sat on the floor of her new bedroom, surrounded by the stuffed animals my parents had been buying to comfort her. "Daddy has agreed that you'll live with me most of the time," I explained carefully. "He'll see you regularly, but only when you feel comfortable and with someone else present at first." Sophie processed this silently, her small face serious. "What about Grandma and Grandpa Anderson?" "They won't be seeing you for a very long time," I said firmly. "Not until they can learn to be kind and respectful." She nodded slowly. "Will I still see Lily? Would you like to?" I asked, surprised by the question. "She's not mean to me," Sophie said simply. "And she gave me her cotton candy at the last family dinner when Grandma said I couldn't have any dessert." We arranged for Sophie to see Lily through Catherine and James, who had remained supportive throughout the ordeal. The cousins maintained their innocent relationship, untainted by the adults' dysfunction. The day after the settlement was filed, I received an unexpected letter from Daniel. Not a legal document, but a personal letter addressed to Sophie. Should I give it to her? I asked Dr. Brennan during our next consultation. She read it carefully and nodded. It's a genuine apology without excuses. It might be an important part of her healing process. That evening, Sophie read the letter silently, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she folded it carefully and placed it in her journal. "What did Daddy say?" I asked gently. "He said he was wrong. He said I didn't do anything bad. He said he's learning to be a better dad." She looked up at me with those wise, old eyes that had seen too much rejection in her young life. "Do you think people can change, Mommy?" I considered my answer carefully. "I think people can learn and grow when they truly want to. But it takes time and real effort, not just words." She nodded solemnly. "I think I want to give him a chance to learn. But I want you to be there too." "I will be," I promised. Every step of the way. 6 months after that terrible day when I found Sophie scrubbing the floor alone, we had established a new normal in our cozy 3-bedroom house. The rental apartment had served its purpose during the immediate crisis, but as the dust settled and our path forward became clearer, I knew we needed a true home to call our own. Sophie's room was painted a cheerful yellow at her request, with bookshelves lining one wall and a reading nook by the window. The transformation in her was remarkable yet still ongoing, a testament to both her resilience and the deep wounds that were still healing. The final custody arrangement gave me primary custody, with Daniel having supervised visitation twice weekly at first, gradually transitioning to regular weekends as Sophie grew more comfortable. True to his word, he had completed parenting classes, attended regular therapy, and made consistent efforts to rebuild his relationship with his daughter. Barbara and Howard remained completely cut off from Sophie. They had made one last attempt to assert their grandparents' rights through their attorney, but the documented evidence of emotional abuse and child endangerment had quickly ended that effort. Daniel had made the difficult but necessary decision to establish firm boundaries with his parents, a process that was painful but essential for both his and Sophie's well-being. They refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing, he told me after a particularly difficult conversation with them. In their minds, blood is the only thing that matters. And anything less is just playing house. Then they've lost something precious, I replied. And it's entirely their choice. Sophie's support network expanded beyond just me and Daniel. My parents visited regularly, showering her with the unconditional grandparental love she deserved. James, Catherine, and Lily became regular fixtures in our lives, proving that not all the Andersons shared Barbara and Howard's toxic beliefs about family. Most importantly, Sophie found friends her own age who accepted her completely. The change in schools had initially worried me, but it proved to be exactly what she needed, a fresh start where no one questioned her place or worth. For Sophie's 9th birthday, we hosted a celebration in our backyard. The contrast to her previous birthday, when Barbara had suggested a small family dinner instead of a fuss over an adoption anniversary, couldn't have been more stark. 24 children from her new school ran through sprinklers and devoured cake, while Sophie beamed at the center of it all, no longer checking to see if her joy was permitted. Daniel arrived with an appropriately modest gift and a genuine desire to participate. He had moved into a small apartment nearby and was slowly rebuilding his life separate from his parents' influence. Our relationship remained strictly co-parental, the romantic connection irreparably damaged by his betrayal. But we were learning to work together for Sophie's sake. She looks happy, he observed as we watched her showing her friends how to make friendship bracelets, a skill taught by her art therapist. She is, I confirmed. Most of the time. She still has nightmares sometimes. And she struggles with perfectionism. Dr. Brennan says that's common in children who've been made to feel their worth is conditional. Daniel nodded, his expression somber. I have a lot to make up for. Yes, I agreed, not softening the truth. But you're showing up now and that matters. Sophie's artwork told the story of her healing better than words could. The dark, confined drawings from immediately after the incident had gradually given way to expansive, colorful scenes filled with figures she identified as her real family, me. Daniel, smaller but present, my parents, Lily, James, Catherine, her friends from school, even her therapist. On the edges, barely visible, were two shadowy figures labeled simply not family anymore. During one particularly significant therapy session, Dr. Brennan asked Sophie to define family in her own words. Family is people who love you even when you spill things or make mistakes, she said confidently. Family doesn't leave you alone when you're scared. Family doesn't have to look the same or come from the same place. Family is a feeling in your heart, not in your blood. The wisdom from this 9-year-old child, who had experienced more rejection and conditional love than many adults, brought tears to my eyes. One rainy afternoon, as we worked on a complex puzzle together, a hobby that helped Sophie's anxiety, she asked a question I'd been expecting but dreading. Can I know about my birth mom someday? I set down my puzzle piece and gave her my full attention. Yes, when you're a bit older and it's appropriate. We have some information in your adoption file. Your birth mother made a difficult choice because she wanted you to have a better life than she could give you. That was an act of love. Sophie considered this seriously. So she didn't give me away because I wasn't good enough? Absolutely not, I said firmly. She gave you a chance at a different life because she loved you very much. Just like I love you. But Grandma Barbara said people who give away their babies don't love them. The casual cruelty of Barbara's words still had the power to wound, even months later. Grandma Barbara was wrong about many things, sweetheart. Especially about what makes a real family. Sophie nodded, returning to her puzzle piece. After a moment, she added, I'm glad you found me. Mom. Finding you is the best thing that ever happened to me, I told her, meaning every word. The journey wasn't over. Sophie would carry these early experiences with her, and we would need to address new challenges as they arose. Daniel continued his efforts to be a better father, though the relationship remained fragile and would require ongoing work from both sides. My own healing process was complicated, balancing forgiveness with appropriate boundaries, learning to trust my instincts more quickly when something felt wrong. But the overwhelming fear and crisis had passed. We had weathered the storm and emerged stronger, wiser, and more intentional about what family meant to us. The painful experience had clarified what truly mattered, not DNA or legal documents or societal expectations, but love, protection, and belonging. As I tucked Sophie into bed that night, surrounded by the stuffed animals she no longer needed to hide when certain people visited, I reflected on how far we'd come from that devastating moment in the kitchen. "You know what, Mom?" Sophie said sleepily. "I think families are like puzzles. The pieces don't have to be the same color or shape. They just have to fit together and make a picture that makes you happy." Out of the mouths of babes comes wisdom we all need to hear. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more about our journey. Have you ever had to stand up for a child when others wouldn't? Share your experience in the comments below. Remember that family is built through love and action, not just blood. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is protect those who cannot protect themselves. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the strength to recognize your true family, however it may be formed.